Pierre, take
Mateo.
the honors. We're live. Let's go.
Let's go.
Okay. Hey everyone. So as continuing as the traditions of RevoU, today we have our guest lecturer, Mr. Tanay. Tanay is a CRM Lifecycle Manager at Grab. Previously, he was at Uber, and he definitely has a lot of interesting stories to share with us today. Unfortunately, I can't do so much justice on his introductions, so I'll let Tanay introduce himself and share his story. Go ahead,
Awesome.
Tanay.
Thanks, Pierre. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks for taking time out on this Friday evening to attend my presentation. So I just want to, share my journey with you guys today, and talk a little bit about what it entails to be a CRM manager at Grab. And I also want to share a little bit about how I got here, right? How did I end up in CRM, and give you a glimpse of what it may look like to work in a CRM role at a company like Grab, and what are some of the skills required. And before I start, I just want to make this presentation as engaging as possible. So, feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions or comments or concerns. With that being said, so just quickly walking you through the agenda, I'll cover a little bit about me. I will then go through, how I approach life cycle segmentation and campaign frameworks, followed by a little bit about a project at Grab, what that looks like, and what working at Grab might entail. And then we can top it up with some questions and discussion. Does that sound good?
Great.
Awesome. All right. So a little bit about me. I've been in Singapore for the last 8 years. I went to SMU, studied economics and marketing. So it's a bit of an unusual combination, most might think, but it turned out to be pretty good for me, because I've been able to apply my love for numbers that I picked up while studying economics and transfer it, sort of mash it with my love for marketing, which entails which has a little bit of the softer things at hand. So, studying both of these two things gave me the ability to tackle things with a very level head, right? The softer skills as well as the harder skills. In terms of my work experience, so I'm currently working at Grab, where I'm managing various CRM campaigns, before which I was at Uber doing a very similar thing. And I started out my career at Burger King. So I was part of their leadership development program, did a bunch of things, got into marketing, and then sort of transitioned to Uber and then Grab. Traits and hobbies, I just put that in to fill up a little bit of white space. But I would classify myself as a structured thinker, a fast learner, someone who's a bit perseverant and works well in dynamic organizations. So I think these kind of traits have helped me along my journey in trying to sort of get in with different organizations and work my way through. Hobbies, so I like playing the piano, I like reading, traveling, which has taken a bit of a backseat during these last few months, and I like playing squash. In terms of skills, so these are skills that I have acquired on the job and off the job. So, things like SQL, Google certifications, Facebook for Business, WordPress, these kinds of things I think are important. It's good to keep learning, which I think most of you guys are doing at RevoU. So yeah, that's basically some stuff about me. So to give you a bit of a flavor about CRM and how I look at life cycle journeys, I decided to do one on myself and show you guys, what are some of the decisions that got me here. So I was born in New Delhi, which is in India, and I spent my childhood there. When I turned 18, it was time for me to go to college. And that was the first decision that I had to make, right? So all the boxes in yellow are the decisions that I made. So my college decision was, well, the first question was whether to go to college or not. No was not an option, primarily because my dad didn't give me a choice. So it kind of turned out to be a yes. And I landed up at SMU, Singapore Management University, where, like I mentioned, I did economics and marketing. But I think one key decision that I made in university was to do an internship. And apart from the fact that it was mandatory to do an internship, I also wanted to do it because it kind of gives you a flavor of what working in, the corporates in a country might be like. So I interned at Singtel, which is a telecommunications company in Singapore. And I did it for 2 consecutive summers. And that sort of gave me a feel of how things may work out, like if I end up taking up a job in Singapore, right? Which brings me to my next decision, which was whether I wanted to work in Singapore or not. And that experience at Singtel kind of, made me take that as a yes. So I started working at Burger King, and at Burger King, I did a bunch of different things until I started doing marketing analytics. And that's when, things really got interesting. The marketing bug kind of bit me there. And then I had another decision to make, whether I want to do a bit more in marketing and get myself fully involved, or whether I want to keep doing the things that I was doing at Burger King. So that kind of then pushed me into Uber, where I found an opportunity in CRM. That was in 2018. And I've been doing, those kinds of things at Uber. And then, as most of you may know, the merger happened with Grab, and I ended up at Grab. So I think, this kind of depicts my story pretty well. And what I think this also highlights is that process maps such as this are a critical yet often overlooked component of CRM, right? So for me, mapping out these kinds of processes is pretty fun and interesting, because it kind of lets you be creative on the job, draw down what certain processes and campaigns may look like. Obviously, a lot of times they aren't realistic, because you may draw out journeys that may be extremely complicated and may not be technically feasible. But yeah, I think this is one of the fun things that I like doing in CRM. So I just wanted to take a minute to sort of ask you guys, what do you think, working in CRM at a company might look like? Some audience participation would be good.
Drawing flowcharts.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Anyone else wants to take a shot?
I think testing campaigns that we are about to launch or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So how I kind of define this as, I have 2 versions of what I do. The first version, which is kind of like the party line, right? It's to impress everyone I meet and tell them that what CRM is. So I tell them that I utilize big data to analyze a customer's behavior across different life stages and set up various dynamic and personalized drip automations across channels to drive incremental actions on a sustained basis. So that's my party line. That's what I tell people I do. And, everyone's like, wow, this is pretty cool. Most people don't understand it, so they don't ask me any more questions. But reality is a bit less glamorous, right? So what I actually do is just, I onboard, engage, retain, and resurrect customers in a timely, personalized, and relevant manner, right? So 3 key things here, and I will talk a bit more about them through the presentation as well, is timely, personalized, and relevant, right? For any CRM campaign, I think these are the 3 key things that need to be checked off for us to, really drive a successful campaign. So yeah, that's basically what CRM is and what I do. And essentially, I also wanted to walk you guys through how I approach lifecycle segmentation, right? a life cycle segmentation for me, and I think this is a pretty standard framework that is applied throughout various organizations. A life cycle segmentation essentially consists of 4 key stages, right? You have your onboarding stage, you have your early life stage, you have your mature, and you have your churn cohorts. And for me, 2 key critical elements that help in defining these 4 different life stages are recency and frequency. So recency being when was the last time that a customer transacted with you, and frequency being how often do they interact with you. Now, there are various other ways to look at this as well. You can add other elements such as a monetary impact, etc. But usually these are the 2 things that help you establish a pretty sustainable framework. So what is onboarding, right? Onboarding is the stage that focuses on activating customers and providing them with guidance to push them towards a first transaction. So for example, now this is an example that is directly applicable to Grab, right? A driver signs up and goes through the onboarding process, which has multiple stages. What CRM may then do is nudge the driver to support him and her through the various steps of the process so that they ultimately get activated and take a first transaction, right? So it's all about how can we support the stakeholder who is in the onboarding stage and walk them through the complicated process so that they start transacting with the platform, right? Any questions? Cool. The next stage is early life. So early life, think of it as someone who is new to the platform. And what we need to do then is engage these customers and educate and nurture them so that they become more sticky to the platform. So for example, an eater has made a few orders on the platform, but is still contemplating whether to continue using the platform. Maybe they have other choices. Maybe they just don't understand the interface of the app, or maybe they're just lazy, right? So what CRM then comes in and does is nudges the eater and handholds him or her with various tips and tricks so that we can guide them through their early days and make them use the platform on a more frequent basis. The next stage is maturity. So this is kind of referred as the golden egg stage, because these are your customers who you've nurtured throughout the onboarding and early life stage. They have become sticky to your platform, and now the whole objective is to retain them and maintain the growth momentum. Over here, it's extremely critical, especially for a company like Grab, to cross-sell products, to enhance their experience and make sure that they continue to transact with us on a regular basis. So for example, a passenger takes trips regularly and is stable on the platform, right? Now, what CRM will then do is nudge these passengers with various newsletters, statements, etc., to provide updates and also recommend various different products like food or delivery or payments and stuff like that. So that is where the focus is on retaining these individuals through enhancing their experience. And the last stage is the churn stage. So over here, essentially, the customer has now become sort of inactive. So what we then must do is focus on resurrecting these customers by resolving their pain points, right? As an example, a merchant is inactive on the platform. We may or may not know why this merchant is inactive on the platform. What CRM will then do is nudge the merchant to understand the problem that they're facing via surveys or any other mechanisms at their disposal, and win them back through a personalized diagnosis of the problem. So these are broadly the 4 stages that we usually work with in a lifecycle framework. And essentially, that being said, just because there are 4 stages doesn't mean that you cannot focus on creating campaigns that are extremely specific or try to solve specific problems, right? Once you have a life stage that you want to tackle problems in, you then need to use data and really deep dive into various different problems that your customers may be facing and try to solve them in a sustainable and cohesive manner. So I've spoken quite a bit on this. Any questions or any comments or thoughts around this?
Hi, Tanay. Hi.
Hey.
My name is Lawrence, and in early life stages, in Singapore they have a competitor like Gojek, and for the first customer that they just new to your platform, and for somehow Gojek appear and with this deliver with the same service, how you and your company to drive them and persuade them that Grab better than Gojek in early life stage? Thank you.
So that's a pretty good question. And that's something that, we've been dealing with not just in Singapore, but across the region, right? You have a host of competitors who are providing a similar service, may undercut you on price. So how do you then go about engaging your customers so that they transact with you more often, right? So usually in these kinds of things, I think what's extremely critical is trying to win over your customer by getting everything right about them. So if I am running my campaigns and I'm being extremely timely, relevant, and using personalized communications, then after a certain, and obviously providing a good quality service where you don't have a bad experience, or even if you do have a bad experience, I'm working with you to try and resolve those experiences. That is how we at Grab look at tackling these kinds of competitors that keep popping up.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think hello.
Hey.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I think this is like what I can see is like onboarding that when Grab uses like a lot of advertisement to interact with all the new customers to download the apps, and the early life that you will get a lot of discount when you do something inside on your app, right? And the mature is like when you already stick with the application that you will get less discount and you just use it. And the churn is once the customer don't use this application, that your application push notification like, do you miss me or something? So you will use it, the application again, and you will get some discount to use this application again. Is that right?
So I think promotions are definitely one of the levers that are used, right, in order to activate customers and resurrect customers. But I think what's important to note is, these kinds of levers require a lot of sort of understanding customer behaviors and utilizing data to be able to target the right customer with these kinds of levers. So for example, if, you know, a certain customer is a high value customer who maybe has a future potential to contribute or has been contributing quite a bit with the platform, then it may be worthwhile to throw those kinds of incentives in order to either activate that customer or resurrect that customer. So I don't think there is one formula that can be applied across all customers. And that is where, the importance of data really comes in. Companies like Grab, which have a lot of data of customers, transactional data, use that data to really try and understand who are the customers, what is their behavior like, and whether it makes sense to just communicate with them, whether it makes sense to gamify the platform so that we make you sticky, whether it makes sense to throw some promotions and stuff like that. But yes, like to your question, that definitely could be one of the strategies that may be used.
Okay, I get it now. Thank you.
And I have a question. What was your onboarding process for people that were on Uber that had to move to Grab?
Oh, so I think I didn't have too much visibility on, you mean in terms of passengers, drivers, or
I think
anybody?
it's across the board, right? Because you have the drivers that you
Yeah.
had to either let go or onboard, and then you had customers who installed Uber, but then are asked to install Grab, and there's some that have installed both, I suppose. But then, so you weren't involved in that transition,
So I wasn't directly
right?
involved, but I think the overall strategy, it was much harder to do that with the supply side of the business, right? With your drivers, with your merchants and your delivery partners, because it takes a lot to onboard these kinds of partners onto your platform. So essentially, if they're onboarded onto Uber, you need to offboard them and then onboard them to a new platform, which is, you know, different to use. There may be different things that you need to use them, different KYB processes and stuff like that. So I think a lot more effort went into trying to onboard the supply side of the business. I think for the demand side of the business, it was a bit more straightforward because it was a matter of simply downloading the app and using the other best option that existed in the market at that point in time. I think what was even harder was human capital, like getting the employees from Uber to Grab. I think that was a pretty tricky situation as well. So across the board, I think Grab and Uber managed it pretty well. Cool. I think so. Before I move on to the next section, one more thing that was just on my mind, right, which I think is important to highlight. Some of you may think, okay, you know, you're starting the CRM process at the onboarding stage, but is CRM really involved in a stage before that, right? Like, how do you get your customers onto the platform in the first place? So the answer to that is no. The CRM process only really starts once a lead has been acquired. So once you have a lead in your platform, whatever that acquisition platform may be, is when the CRM nudges start. Um, Before that, it's more the role of digital marketing and performance marketing to try and acquire those leads, whether it's through, you know, paid channels, organic channels, etc. um, and only once you have that lead and you have enough information to communicate, are you able to start the CRM process. Cool.
Sorry, I have a very interesting question that I think people would like to see your opinion as well, right? So let's say during a churn phase, right, some customers may leave your platforms um, totally, right? Meaning that they actually unsubscribe from your emails, they uninstall your app, right?
Mhm.
At that point, would you consider a CRM strategies where you actually work together with digital marketing, right, to try to retarget these people and get them back to your platform?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. But I would like to break that question down into two. So the first part of it would be more for the unsubscribed and those who have stopped engaging with us, right? Um, for the ones who have unsubscribed with us, because they do not wish to receive any communications, there is no direct way that CRM can be involved in trying to contact those customers. Um, but yes, for the cohort that may have uninstalled the app, we definitely do work with digital marketing to try and funnel those cohorts, maybe not on a regular basis, but periodically to try and get them back on the platform.
Cool, thank
Cool.
you.
All right. So lot of words on this slide, but I just wanted to walk you guys through, you know, what a campaign framework to me looks like and how I approach campaigns at Grab, right? So broadly, you can classify them into 8 steps. The first one being problem definition. So the first question that I ask is, what is the problem, and is there data to support it? And if there is no problem that can be defined and there is no data to support that problem, usually I would not proceed with that campaign. The second step is the target segment. So the question that is often asked here is who needs to be targeted and what is their life stage? So if you have a problem and you have data to support it, the next question is who do you need to target, whether it's an eater, a passenger, a merchant, a driver, who is it, and what is the life stage that we're working at? So the life stages that I just shared, which life stage are these customers at? The third thing is more around the content strategy. So what information needs to be communicated with the certain target audience to solve the problem, right? Is it that we need to do some kind of a value proposition? So for example, let's say you're a driver and you're in your early life. And I notice using data that the drivers are churning in their early life due to some reason. What do I need to do to show these drivers that Grab is a valuable platform? Do I need to highlight the benefits that are applicable to these drivers? Do I need to highlight to them how they can use the app more seamlessly? Do I need to highlight, what are the times when they should be driving? Or is it something else, right? So that is how I define content strategy. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that you need to build your assets and have everything in place, but just what is your messaging going to be here? The fourth step is channel strategy, right? So what's important at the channel strategy level is basically to understand what channels will be should you be using to send your messaging across. So is it emails, is it SMS, is it through the app, is it a phone call? What is it that will best help you get through to your customers? So for example, let's say you're an eater who is in their early life or who has barely transacted with Grab. Does it make sense for me to communicate with you using emails, or does it make sense for me to communicate with you using the app, right? I would go with emails because if you're a new customer who has not started really using Grab, the chances are high that you will not be looking for messages in your app. The fifth step is around the customer journey. So what is the series of nudges? What does it look like, right? So it's kind of like the process map that I showed you earlier. And this is kind of like an art and a science in the sense that it's a science because there usually would be some form of data to support your process, right? So how long should this process be? Should it be for 7 days? Should it be for 2 weeks? And at what frequency do you target these customers? Do you target them every 2 days, every 5 days? So there's usually data that supports your hypothesis, but it's also an art because your data will only take you to a certain point. There will be no data that will tell you that you need to target them every 2 days or in the morning at 9 a.m. on the third day and stuff like that. That kind of comes through experience and interacting with your customers on the platform. And then you usually have an understanding of, how frequently you should communicate with these customers and what are the levers that you should use to communicate with them. The sixth step is create the creative part. So now that you have all of these pieces in place, you need to think about what should your creatives look like. Should you have GIFs in your assets? Should you have icons? Should you use image A? Should you use subject line B? So the good thing about this is that you don't, there are usually indicators that may help you drive your content, right? You may send com A to a certain cohort, and then you may send com B to a certain cohort. You're able to test out what the performance of these different assets are, and then ultimately try and figure out what kind of assets work best for your customers. So that is the creative strategy. And it also is pretty interesting because, a lot of psychological factors may come in here, such as, should I place my call to action button in the main body? Should I place it at the bottom? Should I not have one at all? And those kinds of things then that you test and tweak ultimately help you come up with a framework that may work well for you. The seventh step is key KPIs. So when I'm developing a campaign and I've thought about it and defined everything, you still need to figure out how will you gauge the success of the program. And we'll talk a little bit about this in detail on the next slide. And the last step is the technical aspect. So what should the setup on the tool and the backend be? So I haven't really spoken much about the technical part of CRM, but usually there is a pretty sophisticated framework that supports your campaigns, right? You need to take care of all your data components. At a company like Grab, where we have so much data, it becomes critical to manage that data, right? So that is one part of it. And the second part of it is your tool itself. So no matter what tool you use, you need to pass your data to that tool, and then that tool needs to you need to build your campaign on that tool so that you're targeting your customers through your various automations and campaigns. So broadly speaking, those are the 8 things that I go through. It's kind of like a checklist when I start building a campaign. And if I don't have any of these steps nailed down, then more often than not, the campaign is not one that, one should be spending too much time on. Any questions on this?
Hi, Tanay. I actually have a question regarding this framework. I'm just curious, like when you're segmenting users on the platform, I'm pretty sure that you have to work with various stakeholders, such as probably the IT team or maybe product team. How do you manage the project and like the stakeholders in general, knowing that some of your strategies or like segments might be dependent on them or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a pretty good question. I think project and stakeholder management are pretty critical to manage CRM campaigns. It often requires you to work with various data teams to try and understand, the customer behavior and the customer problems. And it also requires you to work with a lot of operational teams um, to sort of build this framework onto your tool. And it also requires you to work with other teams because Grab is structured regionally. So to work with different countries and different stakeholders across these teams. So what I usually do is before I start any campaign, I scope it out. I scope it out across all countries. I speak to various relevant stakeholders and try to understand if there is a need for this problem to be solved. And then once I have that basic scoping in mind, I do a kickoff, right? I do a kickoff where I bring all stakeholders into one room and hear everyone's ideas. It often is pretty productive because the things come up that a certain individual may not have thought about before. So by bringing all the stakeholders into one room, you're able to sort of nail a lot of these steps down. And then I think one critical thing that I specifically do is build timelines, because it's very, very important to sort of have people accountable for their part of the process, and people need to take ownership for it. So I think through these kinds of kickoffs and broader meetings where we align on timelines and build a strategy, accountability becomes very important, and sort of that's what helps me manage these processes a bit more efficiently.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Hey.
Of course.
I just want to ask, how, on what level, like AI or automatizations involved in this kind of framework?
So I think AI and machine learning are very sort of, they're extremely important in the data part of the process. But I don't think that you necessarily need that advanced level of data analytics to run a campaign. So, and the answer to your question basically is, it depends on the campaign and it depends on the problem that we're trying to solve. So if there is a problem where we are trying to predict what customers might churn from our platform, that may require an extremely advanced amount of data analytics and machine learning and predictive models to be set up. But if it's a problem where we are just trying to understand at what stage of the sign-up process or at what stage of the sign-up funnel are merchants getting stuck at, for those kinds of problems, you often do not need that level of sophisticated data analytics.
Thank you.
And oftentimes, right, people think that to solve problems, the more data you have and the more advanced analysis you do, the better your approach might be. But I don't necessarily agree with that, because sometimes you just need to keep things simple, right? You need to understand the problem, and to solve the problem, you just need to keep a level head and try to understand what are the tools at your disposal and how you can go about doing it. You don't need to build a model for every campaign that you run.
And let me translate, since I'm one of the few here that can speak Bahasa. Let me translate one question from Python. I would like to know a little bit more, if you can elaborate a little bit more on the creative strategies, I guess. So what do you mean by assets? If you can just elaborate a little bit more with some examples.
Sure. So assets basically mean your marketing collateral, right? So for example, you have an email that you want to send out. So the email is an asset or a collateral, and the creative strategy basically means how should you design your email? What should the framework look like? Should you have should you have two images? Should you have one image? Should you have a main body followed by icons? Should you have a step-by-step GIF or an animation which sort of is helping a customer understand what the steps required for a certain action are? So that is what an asset necessarily means. And I think so how the process works for me is we have a creative team that supports us with these campaigns, right? So I often brief those creative teams with the content and with the wireframes that I may have in mind, and then they essentially help aesthetically modify what I have in mind, so that we can use it with the customers, because I'm an extremely non-creative guy, and my best art is often stick figures. So the creative team is,
I think there's a pattern here, right, Pierre? Because
that's exactly me.
There's a lot of people in the expert in the CRM field that share the same the same skill set, right? So super strong on data structure and framework, and very lacking when it comes to content and creative. It seems like it's a it's a pretty common pattern.
yeah. But I think like that's an interesting point, right? I do have colleagues who are more strong on the creative front, and a little bit less on the data front. So again, I think there is no one type of a model employee that you need to have for this. But what must then be important is for the resource manager to be able to help apply an individual's strengths into the right problem. So for example, if there is a campaign which requires a lot of creative strategy, then the person with those skill sets should work on that problem more, and vice versa.
What I think it's interesting on that is, especially from the outside, or from people that they don't know much or anything about CRM. You would have the tendency to to think that CRM is all about writing nice looking newsletter, so for people to click on it, right? So whereas the core and the biggest part of it is really being able to look at the data and make sense out of it. So
I think that's right. It does require more than drafting out just your communications or your templates. So once you do start working in CRM, you kind of start seeing all these little nuances that are in place, and appreciate the importance of CRM even more.
Pierre, do you want to you want to translate the second part of the question that was a bit too complex for me to translate?
Yeah. Okay. So so the follow-up questions from Python as well is there's actually two parts for this. So the first one is when you are doing this campaign framework, right? Which step do you think holds a crucial key to ensure that your campaign reaches its target?
Mm-hmm.
And the second part to it is there any of the step that you use it take more considerations on and work on it a little bit more rather than the other steps?
Sure. So I think the step that is critical to reach the correct audience is the second step, which is the target segment, right? And I think that combined with your channel strategy become extremely important. So if I'm targeting the right customer using the right channels, then I can be pretty, and assuming that my tools work, then I can be pretty confident that I'm reaching the right person. But if those two pieces are not in place, then it becomes harder to reach the right person at the right time. I think in terms of the most important step, I don't think there is one really important step. I think all of them are pretty important, but one step that is definitely more time consuming than the others is trying to figure out the creative strategy. So that requires the most amount of man hours to get any campaign off the ground, because the other things, the creative strategy in itself, because you're building a series of nudges and because you're using multiple channels and going regional, which means that your assets need to be in different languages, etc. The creative component definitely takes a lot more time than the others.
Can I, oops, where's my video? Can I ask you so an additional question on that? So regarding how do you go about testing? Unless you're covering that in the next slides. So if you are not, my question would be whether you're typically testing at the same time different step of this process, right? For each campaign, or you stick to one. So basically more concretely, so you are, you have all those 8-step design, and then you are A/B testing on the creative strategy only, or you're also typically trying to test on the creative side, but also on the channel and also on the content strategy. So what is the level of granularity of testing that you typically do for each campaign?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I'll sort of cover a little bit of that on the next slide as well. But to answer your question, we do all, right? There is no limit to the level of granularity that we go to. Some are easier to test than others. So for example, you're testing your creative assets is usually more easy because it's just a matter of switching out a subject line or tweaking where your call to action button is positioned and stuff like that. Whereas testing out your entire campaign, your series of nudges, or the audiences that you're targeting, etc., are a bit more difficult to do. And part of the reason for that is also because you often need to give these campaigns a bit of time to gain some momentum and to really get an understanding of what's going on, because there are so many externalities in the market as well, right? That just running a campaign for a day or two or a week will not help you understand whether the campaign is successful or not, or whether you need to tweak the broader goals. Yeah. Cool. So I think, at the bottom of this slide, I just added in some, key takeaways and elements that I think are extremely essential for CRM campaigns. So they should be data-driven, they should be personalized, and personalization is also a pretty interesting aspect of CRM, right? When you receive a communication that addresses you by your name, which tells you maybe how many transactions you may have, how much how many food orders you have made. It definitely goes a longer way in showing that, we know about our customer, and we are able to sort of wow them a little bit with all these little attributes and personalizations. The third thing is dynamic. What I mean by dynamic is, let's say that you are a consumer. Let's say you are a passenger who takes trips in a car versus takes trips on a bike, right? Dynamism would mean that I am able to often target you in the same campaign, but I am able to at the same time send you assets that are a bit tweaked to your use case, right? So instead of sending a communication that says car to everyone, if you're a bike user, it'll say bike. It might have an image of a bike on it rather than a car. So these and across different cities, across different countries, these nuances may be there, which make it more relevant for you. Right. So that is what a dynamic communication usually is. They need to be timely so that I am targeting you when you have something at the top of your mind. Most of our campaigns are automated, which means that it's a series that is being sent out, either driven by a certain time or driven by a certain action. Right. So maybe I send you a communication when you have made a food order, or maybe I send you a communication 3 days after you have made a transaction, right? So those are the levers that you have to automate your campaigns. And the last one is relevant. So these 6 elements are what broadly a campaign for me looks like. It's possible that some campaigns have less or more, but I think it's a good checklist to have when you're building campaigns. Any questions, guys? I know everyone might be tired on a Friday night after a week's worth of hard work.
I just wanted to translate the final part of Piton's message. He just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Pierre, anything different for your product, which is quite different than Grab in the way you approach campaigns at Stashaway?
No, I think in general the framework is almost the same, right? With different teams and different members of people who are working on the company, right? Some steps might be different, right? Some steps might be combined together, right? Some steps might be skipped, but in general, these are a good framework of what we think about when we actually created a campaign. And Tanay helped, really visualizes what I have been doing on a day-to-day basis.
Awesome.
There's actually one question, sorry, on the chat, right? I'm just gonna read it to Tanay from Fikri, right? He's curious when the developer changed the matchmaking algorithm, and then the driver were not happy with the update. How do you maintain the relationship between your team and the developer team?
Okay.
Because, for example, I think the key here is like the KPI of the developer team is maybe different from the KPI of the CRM team, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So usually, like, there are so many changes that keep happening. It's impossible for us as part of CRM to manage all those changes in case issues keep coming up, right? So there are dedicated support teams that sort of help out with that. But if there are issues, like pertinent issues that exist, that are really harming or not helping these customers do what they need to do, then we will maybe set up some campaigns. Some campaigns can be ad hoc as well, right? Which are just addressing that one product issue that may be prevalent, or maybe trying to address the sentiment that arises out of that particular product. But usually that is not what we focus on. What we focus on is trying to work in this framework that we have set up, and trying to send communications on a daily basis through automations, etc., kind of like a drip campaign that is helping us on a broader term achieve certain goals. Does that answer the question?
I think yes.
Cool. All right. So the next slide is essentially a campaign illustration that I drew out, and I just wanted to give you guys an understanding of, you know, what on a macro level, what a campaign flow looks like and how we may approach measuring a campaign. But before I show it to you guys again, I will ask any idea on how we go about doing that, or any thoughts on what's a good way to do it?
Maybe it depends on like the stage of the campaign that you're trying to do and that main action that you're trying to drive, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but how would you do that? How would you measure it? Like, how can I go to my boss and say, hey, I spent a month or 2 months building this campaign, spent so much time and so much money on it. How do I say it's successful or not?
Maybe like using like the use of analytics like GA or Firebase or whatnot, and then try to track the metrics from there and justify it. Maybe.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, yes, we definitely do need to use analytics to try and understand whether a campaign is performing. But fundamentally speaking, how we do that is through the setup of control groups, right? So what is a control group? A control group is a cohort of your audience that does not receive any of the communications. So let's say, for example, you have 100 merchants, right, who are in their churned out stage. So they aren't transacting with the platform anymore. What we will then do is to set up a campaign. We will randomly split them into a treatment and a control group, right? And the split, you can split them as like 90%, 10%, 50%, 50%. That kind of a split is often determined by the volume of your audience. So if you have a very high audience volume, then you can usually take a higher treatment and a lower control. But if your audience is not too large, then you often need to balance it out so that your results are statistically significant, right? So you split your cohort into treatment and control. The treatment cohort is the one that receives your communications, and the communications can be across a wide array of channels, right? It can be emails, SMSs, app inbox messages, push notifications, etc. Whatever channels you have at your disposal and which you can use through the tool that you have. Once the treatment group does receive the communications, you usually give a cooldown or an attribution window to see if your targeted audience is taking certain actions. So in this case, where my merchants have churned out, I might give them 7 days or 2 weeks or even a month to see if they come back and start transacting on the platform again because of the communications that I have sent them, right? And once this attribution window is over is when I look at my results. So I will usually have some primary metrics and some secondary metrics to try and understand whether my campaign is working or not. So if my merchants are transacting on the platform again, then my primary metric would have been met, right? They're transacting. My secondary metric might be okay, how much money are they generating for me, right? That may be my secondary metric. Or are they signing up for the promotions that I have sent them? So that's kind of like the secondary metric, the metric that's not so important, but something that provides a good understanding of whether the communications are really working through a secondary kind of screen. And yeah, basically you compare how your treatment group is performing versus how your control group is performing. and you put those numbers as uplifts or incrementality. So basically, what you're able to say through this setup is that if I was not sending these communications to the treatment group, then I would have lost out this much of an impact in transactions or in sales or whatever other metric that you're looking to analyze. Does that kind of make sense for everyone?
Sorry, may I know more about how to what do you mean by random split?
So a random split would essentially mean that there is no there is no sort of metric that you're using to split your audience. So I'm completely, if I have 100 merchants, I'm not seeing, whether the merchants are performing well or they're not performing well, or whether the merchants are scattered in a particular city or not. I will just randomly split them. So there will be no sort of rationale for splitting those merchants. And the reason for doing that is to ensure that, you aren't splitting it so that a certain group, like the treatment of the control, might be influenced, right? You don't want to spoil or dilute your treatment and control groups.
So
Yeah.
can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So is that mean you contact only on the treatment group, while, for example, you ignore the control group? You contact only one group and you ignore the other?
So usually, yes. But let's say that, we're targeting the early life group where we need, there may be some transactional messages or some operational messages that might need to go out to the control group as well. But barring those, any sort of marketing communications that you're sending to drive incremental transactions or any form of incremental behavior, those communications only go out to the treatment group and not to the control group. So basically, the control group will have enough information to take an action, but we aren't nudging them repeatedly or trying to influence their behavior so that they take that action. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Any other questions on this? All right. So next, I wanted to share with you guys one of the campaigns that I think is pretty cool. It's a campaign that's a bit atypical. It's not something that you would think that CRM is doing, but this is essentially a year in review campaign that we did in 2019, at the end of 2019, where we were targeting Grab's partners, right? Partners being drivers, delivery partners, etc., across the region. And the reason why I want to showcase this campaign is because it required a lot of technical and data sophistication and required us to work across the board with a lot of stakeholders to pull this through. So to give you context on this campaign, the idea was to essentially showcase to our partners, Grab's partners, about their efforts in 2019 and highlight to them, what were some of their achievements throughout that year. And we wanted to sort of do that in an engaging manner. We wanted to utilize some disruptive channels. We didn't just want to send a newsletter or a statement or an email. We wanted to do it through something unique and something cool. And just, we wanted to drive a sort of appreciation for these drivers and create some fun year-end kind of conversations. So what we ended up doing was we built personalized videos for all of our drivers, highlighting their performance for that particular year. So let's say you have 100 drivers. Each of those 100 drivers received a video in their inbox, in their app, as widgets across the board, which showed them through that video what their achievements were. And I'll show you an example of the video on the next slide. So this was a pretty sort of technically sophisticated campaign, because firstly, creating videos is not easy. And then creating videos for each and every driver on your platform and sending it to them requires a lot of coordination and collaboration, both across the region and in terms of data. And in terms of the KPI, the objective was to see if, incrementally we achieve more engagement and drive more satisfaction amongst these driver partners. So here is a video of what that campaign looked like. Now, this is a generic video which we put up on YouTube, but to understand, once you watch this video, you will see various metrics and stats that are in it. So all of those were personalized for each and every driver when we sent it to them, right? So this one is in Bahasa, so I think it should be easy for you guys to understand. But here goes.
Semua usaha Anda di tahun 2019 benar-benar luar biasa. Anda selalu ada untuk mereka walau hujan maupun panas. Selalu bersedia menempuh perjalanan. Tak peduli berapa lama waktu yang dibutuhkan. Anda ada pada saat jam-jam sibuk. Di tengah teriknya siang hari, bahkan saat larut malam. Anda selalu ada, dari Senin yang sendu hingga akhir pekan bersama keluarga. Usaha keras Anda mendorong kami untuk terus melakukan yang lebih baik bagi Anda. Anda yang mendorong kami berbuat sesuatu yang lebih untuk Anda dan masyarakat. Kami tahu Anda tidak melakukan semua ini hanya demi mendapatkan hadiah, tetapi ini adalah dorongan untuk Anda demi menjalani hidup sebaik-baiknya, terutama bagi mereka yang Anda cintai. Terima kasih kepada Anda semua untuk perjalanan yang luar biasa di tahun 2019.
So, were you able to hear the audio in the video?
Yes, it was breaking up a little bit, but yeah.
Cool. So you see all those different stats. When were the drivers active? How many trips or transactions they had? What days were they active on? Stuff like that. So all of those metrics were personalized for each of these drivers that we targeted. And yeah, basically the response we got was pretty overwhelming. We were able to hit our KPIs, which was, drive engagement and drive satisfaction. We saw an improvement in our NPS scores and things like that, versus the control group that did not receive the videos. So yeah, this I think is one of the most challenging campaigns that I've worked on, because sending videos to each and every customer, which are personalized for them, requires a lot of effort. But yeah, I think usually, you wouldn't think of this as a CRM campaign or something that CRM may do, but it is in fact what we drive: personalized, timely, relevant communications using various channels.
Here, any idea to your own end of the year financial performance email?
We actually considered stuff like this, but I agree with Tanay. This actually requires really a lot of effort, right? I think what we did planned was like something like, your report card in Stashaway, right? So something like you have saved X amount of dollars, right? You have deposited more than X times. You are X% faster, or you're X year faster in reaching your retirement and stuff like that. But that is not easy, right? Because I think the toughest part is actually the content strategies around this part, content and creative strategies, right? What do you actually want to put on that particular email, video, and stuff that actually resonates well with your customer?
Mm-hmm.
And there are actually quite a few of those of those campaigns. Which one are you mostly impressed from a technical perspective from the likes of, as a user, I find very, very useful the Facebook ones, the Spotify ones.
Yeah.
There are also others, but I guess
Yes. So I think those have been going on for years, right? Like 9, 10 years you've been receiving those. This is the first time we did it, and I think it turned out okay. There's still a lot more improvement that can be made, but it's much more complicated than we'd imagined when we set out on it. Um, I think the tough parts of this, in addition to just the creatives, right, which involves the storyboarding and the animations and stuff like that, is working on sending an individualized video to each customer, right? These videos are hosted in different places. We need to make sure that the particular customer is receiving the correct link. They are receiving their link has all the correct information that is coming out of Grab's database. There are a lot of PII challenges, which is basically data protection and stuff. So there are a lot of moving pieces that go into it, and at the end of the day, you also need to ensure that you aren't revealing anything that's proprietary or confidential. So it has a lot more different angles. The learning curve was a bit steep, but I think it turned out to be a pretty fun and cool project that we worked on.
Were you able to justify this though, like the cost of just building this out and delivering it?
So yeah, in terms of the incrementality that we saw in the engagement scores, and even in terms of the transactions and the GMV, etc., justified the cost of making these videos.
I guess that when you have hundreds of millions of customers, it gets pretty easy to justify the cost if the uplift is even if it's minimal, right?
Yeah.
By the way, Nito, oh sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
So sorry. Yeah, I just want to ask, how do you get the buy-in from your team for this kind?
How did I get the buy-in?
Your boss or something?
Yeah, I went up to my boss. I said, we've never done any videos. Let's do it. He said, how much will it cost? I really, really, really underplayed the budget. He said, cool. And then when we were in the middle of the project where there was no turning back and the budget actually came to light, we still went ahead with it. No, I'm kidding. We really thought about, who do we want to target? We didn't send it out to everyone. We decided that because there is a limited budget, we should target, we should have certain thresholds for targeting, right? Maybe we should only target those customers who've been active throughout the year, and not just taken one transaction in March and then nothing else throughout the year. So by doing that, we were able to optimize our targeting audience. So we did all of that. And then we tried to figure out, okay, are there any ways through which we can build this video using capabilities that we have in-house? So that sort of brought the budget down a bit more. And ultimately, we were using our own tools and our own channels to communicate. We didn't do any paid marketing for this, etc., because they were personalized videos. So I think a combination of those helped us justify the cost of building this. And ultimately, yes, like, you do need to pay a certain amount sometimes to appease customers and show them your gratitude. So we had certain benchmark engagement and satisfaction scores that we wanted to achieve, beyond which the cost would have been justified. And we built those benchmarks using previous campaigns that we had run, and also use some industry numbers to see if it would work out.
Thank you.
Nito, you want to ask your question directly?
Yeah, sure, sure. I was just asking, like in terms of satisfaction, you mentioned that you were measuring it through the NPS scores, but like in terms of engagement, what specific metrics are you measuring your campaign against?
So that's a good question. And I missed that on the last slide where I showed the incrementality. Usually how we classify channel engagement metrics are through things like open rates, click rates, and unsubscribe rates, stuff like that. So that's how we broadly look at engagement. In a series of nudges, that becomes a bit harder because let's say at the beginning of a certain journey, a customer might be more engaged and then that kind of tapers off. But if you sort of average it out for the entire journey, then you also get a pretty good understanding of whether that open and that click, etc., is working or not. And for certain campaigns where you're using links in your communications that lead to your product, you're also able to track the conversion of those links, right? So let's say I am sending out a link and my objective is for you as an eater to make an order, right? If you're making that order using my link or the journey that you're going through using that link, I can also track that for certain campaigns. So I may use engagement as whether you landed up on my app, I may consider you engaged depending on the objective of the campaign.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Any more questions on this? All right. So that brings me to the next part, which is, what are some of the things that you need to start out in CRM? So the CRM toolkit. And before I show you guys what I think is important, maybe, you guys could say what you think is important to start out in CRM. What are your thoughts on this? Anyone wants to get some class participation points?
Yeah, I should point some people here.
Class participation point is a good one.
You should offer them an internship at Grab.
A free voucher can help as well, I think. Maybe specify what you mean by toolkit. So do you mean tools? Because we get some answers in terms of softwares like HubSpot, Salesforce.
No, so not necessarily. Yeah, toolkit is a bit ambiguous, but essentially, what are some of the things? What are some of the skill sets or traits that you may need to start out in CRM, right? Like I'll give you an example. You should have a good understanding of Microsoft Office, so how to build presentations, how to use Excel so that you can run your various analysis, present your thoughts to the audience and stuff like that, right? So that would be an example of what is needed. So any other guesses? HubSpot, Salesforce, data. Yeah, getting warmer.
Whimsical. It's a inside story, Tanay. You might not get it, but huge fan. Actually, no, the side story is since Pierre in the previous batch introduced Whimsical as a tool, we started using it organization wide for everything. So it's such a good tool.
Yeah, even things that didn't need it, we still use it.
I need to get my referral fee from them then.
Yeah. So I just listed down some things which are important, right? Which we want our teammates and colleagues to have, right? So the first one, which was mentioned earlier as well, is project and stakeholder management. So it is extremely important to know how to work well with diverse teams, both internally and externally, right? So you may have teammates in CRM who are working with you on data, who are working with you on operational execution and stuff like that. So this becomes very important. And then if you're working for a regional company like Grab, you also need to work with various different country representatives and other operational and marketing teams to run your campaigns. So I think this one on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 10. And there is no particular way to sort of learn it, but in the sense that once you start working in a company, you sort of figure it out. You don't just read about it and pick it up, but there are definitely things that you can do so that you're prepared to take on this kind of a role when you start out. So that would be the first thing. The second thing that I've put in is process design and implementation. So what I mean by process design is building out a process map using various tools, which is pretty straightforward, right? But what's important is having that clarity of thought so that you can put in the important elements in a process and the key decisions that are required to get you through that process. So that would be the second thing. Microsoft Office tools, which I already mentioned, are also important so that you can do your own analysis as well as present to various different stakeholders. Strategic thinking. So again, this one is a bit of an important one in the sense that you need to have the clarity to understand customer problems and lead a certain team at a regional scale. So this is where your strategic thinking comes into place, which sort of takes into consideration the 8 steps that I'd mentioned earlier as well, right? So that is what this entails. The next one is programming languages. So I think you guys mentioned certain tools and something that I consider as part of programming languages is SQL, Python, stuff like that. So this is a good to have, but not a must. And a good to have is also knowing how to use Salesforce and HubSpot and everything else, but it's not a must, right? It's always a good to have, but these are things that you can pick up on the job. And usually, at least at Grab, we don't look for candidates who may have these skills. But yeah, if you do, it's just an add-on. So I, for example, did not know how to do any of this. I learned it on the job as well as off the job. So now I have a good understanding of SQL. But yeah. And the last one, I think this is a pretty textbook kind of a skill set to develop, which is the willingness to learn. So often at companies like Grab, which are extremely fast-paced and dynamic, the learning curve is pretty steep. So it's important to always be on your toes and want to learn and go through different things and ask questions so that you can succeed in the role. So yeah, this is the CRM toolkit. Pierre, I don't know whether you have some other considerations for this as well.
Yeah, actually, I just thought 2 things about it, right? That I think is also important to have here, right? So I think the first one is definitely, I don't know if it's called a toolkit or not, but it's definitely resilience, right? Because being on the job on the CRM team is actually not easy, right? Doing stakeholder management, right? Trying to get a buy-in from your management and your boss to actually run a certain campaign, right? Or even, let's say, liaising with your designer because they just can't understand your creative brief, right? Takes a lot of resilience, right? And then you need to hold on for a long time because a project of CRM can't just be done maybe, let's say, in like 2 or 3 days. Sometimes it can stretch out to a month or a quarter, right? But you must know that it will be worth it in the end, right? Once you see your campaign goes out, you see all the numbers rolling in, right? That's when you feel good satisfactions of your result, right? The other thing that I think also important is the customer centricity, right? I think CRM team should be the voice of the customer as well, right? What you should be doing is to help guide the customers and help the customers, right, to make use the best of your product, right? And sometimes you will need to clash with certain teams, right? Because, for example, let's say, for example, sales teams wants to send out a campaign, right, very often, right, that impacts negatively on the customers, right, but maybe will reflect better on their KPI, right? So these are the times that you need to be customer advocate, meaning that whatever you do is for the best of the customers, for the needs of the customers, and not just for the company.
Yep. Yeah, I think those are pretty important. And I have a little quote at the end of this presentation, which kind of highlights the whole point about customer centricity. So I'll come to it at the end. Any other questions on this, guys?
I'm actually curious about the programming language part. Like you mentioned that SQL would be nice to have and all that, but how does it actually fit into your like daily job and tasks? That's what I can't really imagine right now.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So I think this is more specific for Grab because we're a very data-driven company and we have a lot of data, right? So why it helps me is because we have various platforms where this big data is stored, and yes, we do have analytics teams, etc., that are looking at this data for the purpose of campaigns. But if I myself am able to go and query out that data and get an understanding of, what our targeting should be or what are the numbers for a certain segment or cohort, it really helps me because it just fastens my time to scope the campaign. And it also, from a business point of view, enhances my understanding of how we should approach campaigns. So yeah, but like I said, it's not a must, right? Because I can definitely ask the data teams for support. It's just if you want to be more proactive about it and do the smaller tasks that you can do and be more self-sufficient, that's where it comes into play.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask you actually related to this a question, which is how often do you see or do you interview or do you have in your team people that comes actually from a very technical programming background that move into CRM? Is that something common, or it's more like marketeers then add on top of their skill set some basic programming skills?
So I don't think it's super common. Usually it's marketers doing analytics and stuff, which I think is a course that you guys are looking into as well, right? Marketing analytics and stuff. So I think that is usually how the process goes. But I have worked with colleagues who've been from more technical backgrounds who've kind of then added the lens of marketing to their toolkit. So it goes both ways, but the latter is a bit rarer to see. Cool. So yeah, don't get too scared by this, but I had a case question that I wanted to ask you guys, and it's pretty straightforward. There are two types of customers, and here are the facts. I'll walk you guys through the facts, and then on the next slide I have a little voting system on Pigeonhole. So maybe then we can take a vote as to who the correct customer according to you we should target, right? So customer A. Now, customer A has an acquisition cost of $20. Okay. The customer takes 50 trips in their lifetime worth an average of $10, right? The company, which is Grab in this case, or any other company, charges a commission of 20% per trip, right? Therefore, the lifetime value of this customer is $100. How is it $100? You have 50 trips, $10 per trip, that's $500. You take a 20% commission, you come down to $100, right? Straightforward. Any questions on this customer?
No.
Okay, so then we move to customer B. So customer B has an acquisition of $50. The customer takes 100 trips in their lifetime, worth an average of $10, right? The company is charging the same commission for this customer as well, which is 20%. And the lifetime value of this customer, therefore, is $200. How is it 200? You have 100 trips, $10 per trip, charge a 20% commission, $200. So my question to you is, which type of customer would you rather target? Would it be customer A or customer B? And to do this, I've created a little pigeonhole. So if you guys can quickly take out your phones and either go to pigeonhole.at or just scan this barcode, you will be able to see the survey. And then you just click customer A or customer B, and we can take a vote, and then we can discuss a bit more as to why it's customer A or customer B.
For the sake of the exercise, should we assume that customer A is a Gojek customer and customer B is a Grab customer? Is that to make it more realistic?
You can assume that both are Grab customers.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So all good so far? Are you guys able to access it?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
I'm done.
Done.
Yes.
Okay.
Go back to the previous slides so that people that have forgot the numbers, they can look at it again.
So let's just take a minute to vote. So is everyone done? Should we take a few more seconds?
Maybe while we give a few more seconds to give some additional context to it, is this a, let's say, simplified version of a typical interview question that you might ask?
Yeah, this would be one of the questions that I may ask, right? These are, so the key here is these are the facts presented. Don't overthink, don't make any assumptions. This is what you have to deal with, and make a decision basis that.
Cool.
So
actually, I need to change my vote. Damn it. I realized too late. Oh my God.
Voted.
You're not hiring me, buddy. I just failed.
It's completely anonymous. It's fine. I don't know who's voting.
Luckily.
All right. Should we see the results? Okay, then. So these are the results. We have 42.4% of people who voted for customer A, and the rest have voted for customer B. So maybe someone from who's voted for customer A would like to offer why they've voted for customer A. Any volunteers?
Should we start with Razi?
No, I want to change my vote. I moved from customer B to customer A, okay? And if you want the reason, I'll let you know later. It's probably right.
I don't want to do any cold calling, so come on, guys. Someone who hasn't spoken up before.
Maybe can you put back? I would suggest if you could put back the slide so we re-see the numbers, right?
Yes, I can do that.
I vote for customer A.
Mm-hmm.
The reason because I'm a cheapskate, so I want to acquire the cheapest possible customer. Yeah, never mind it make only 50 trips, right? But in terms of the cash flow value, that is something for the bottom line. That's
Okay.
the reason.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay.
Anyone have any other reason for wanting to acquire customer A?
Should I share my thoughts?
Yeah.
Or
But you voted for customer B, right?
yeah, I know, but I want to switch to A.
Don't be the bully that takes over the spotlight and
And it's for a different reason to Chris.
Well, I like to hear that. Please.
I'll share. If nobody else is going to give a reason for A, I'll give my reason for A. If it's okay.
Yeah.
Yes, go for it.
Because you could acquire 2.5 more customers, and therefore you could have a higher lifetime value for the same acquisition costs. That's my reason. So sort of being a cheapskate, but long-term cheapskate.
Fair.
Agree with that.
Okay. If no one else has any more insights for customer A, let's hear for why the majority voted for customer B. So the 57% of you who voted for customer B, why did you vote for customer B? Anyone have any desires of sharing?
I actually just subtract the lifetime value out of the acquisition cost and find that customer B has the larger, I don't know what to say, but larger net than customer A, sort of. So I just minus, like for customer A, 100 minus 20, and then for customer B, 200 minus 50. And I find customer B to be larger, as in 150 compared to 80.
Okay, that's fair. Any other reasons for picking customer B? Okay, if not, I will walk you guys through which customer I would pick, and I will tell you why. So, the key metric that I am looking at to pick this customer is not just the amount of revenue that they're generating or what my total net profit is. What I, as a marketer and in CRM, I'm looking at is for each dollar that I'm spending, what is the return that I'm getting, right? Because there is no talk of a budget or anything here, and assuming that everything else is the same, you have one customer that's generating $100 with just $20 spent, and you have one customer who's generating $200 with $50 spent, right? So what I am looking at is what is this customer's lifetime value to acquisition cost? And whichever customer is giving me a higher lifetime value to the cost of acquisition, I will pick that customer. So in a way, yes, this is kind of the cheapskate theory as well, because you're able to get more in the $50 that you spend. Assuming that your budget is $50, you're able to get 2.5 of these customers and therefore a higher lifetime value. But you know, the ideal way to see this kind of a problem would be to see what your return on marketing investment is. For each dollar that you're spending, what is the return you're getting? Because you know, tomorrow you can spend $100,000 or $1 million, and you may be able to generate a higher lifetime value, right? But is that the correct way to acquire customers. It need not necessarily be, right? So the efficiency of the dollar is what I am looking at, which is why I'm looking at the lifetime value to acquisition cost. Does that kind of make sense to everyone?
Not an easy one.
I think to just give a
What
point
is
of
your
view in
choice, Matteo?
My choice actually was customer.
He chose C.
none of you.
Out of the box, customer. Yeah, was customer B. I was just looking in absolute terms, but I fully see the the point, right? So
yeah,
Matteo, I think that takes back to our experience. I remember there was a time in Zalora where our main KPI is fully revenue, right? Not even the efficiency or like the ratio of the acquisition cost. So I would like to give a point of view. Sometimes
thanks, Pierre.
you might be required to just pursue fully revenue no matter what the cost is. And when that time comes, you go for customer B instead of customer A.
definitely. No, I think that's a very fair point. If the organization is just chasing lifetime value and you're willing to burn through a lot of money and not even look at acquisition cost, then yes, you may go for customer B. But at the end of the day, assuming that we are all rational marketers and do not have big purses to invest out of, you would look at the efficiency of the investment. Cool. Any other questions on this, guys? All right then. So I guess I'll move to the closing remarks. I have a little quote that I found online, which I find pretty funny. So yeah, just take a second to read through it. So basically what it says is that our study concludes that this is the percentage of our customers who will buy from us without any effort whatsoever on our part. And it's a big fat zero, right?
Matteo,
So,
can you translate that to Indonesian?
I swear I was about to make the same joke, but it was starting to get a bit repetitive, so I didn't.
I think he cannot copy paste the pictures.
That's a good point as well, Chris.
yeah, so basically, I guess like the moral here is that you can never take your customers for granted, right? You have to earn the respect of your customers and build sustainable relationships with them over the long term. And you need to actively manage these relationships. And that's basically what CRM is about. So yeah, with that, I reached the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening to me blabber on about CRM.
Super awesome. Tanay, do you have maybe 10-15 minutes for Q&A?
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. So guys, if you have any questions, this would be the right time to put your hands up, unmute button, and then ask your question. We haven't heard from batch 2, except for Chris. Sorry, Chris. We haven't heard from many from batch 2. Any one of you guys have questions?
I guess the presentation was so good it answered everyone's questions.
Yeah, they're still trying to.
I have a question now.
A or B. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Tanay, how you manage your background becoming very clear, crisp like that? It's irrelevant with the presentation, but the background in your Zoom, you know.
You mean my Zoom background?
Yeah.
Oh, I just, so this is kind of what the one of the Grab offices looks like. So I just use
Okay.
that as a background.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
So
Cool.
Chris, how does this relate to CRM?
No, just to ice breaking for all the colleague, you know.
Chris,
It's part
can
of
you
the content strategy, actually.
content strategy? Chris, can you turn on your video? I want everyone to see your setup, man. There
Okay.
you
Okay.
go. All right. Ready for a
Nice.
rap battle.
Oh, that's very professional.
Razi always make a joke about this setup. That's why
I'm envious, Chris. I'm envious. I want to sound just like you, man. With it.
I
Do it in
honestly,
batch 3, Razi.
I cannot hear my voice, right? because the Zoom system only give my real voice, and you hear the what is the real voice come out from this one.
Chris, that means we don't watch the recording of you asking questions in classes. Does that?
No, I do provide some meetings, also some presentation. That's why, and my voice is actually soft, so that's part of the reason. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Sorry if I go back to the serious topic. Can I ask a question? So what are the companies in Southeast Asia, be it Indonesia, also other countries in the region, that you look up to in terms of CRM sophistication and strategies? So the one you think are more advanced, with the exception of Grab and
Grab, yeah. I think no, Indonesia is a very happening market with a host of e-commerce players. So I definitely look up to a lot of these e-commerce players. I don't have experience with them in Indonesia, but at least in Singapore, right? The likes of Lazada, Amazon, etc. Definitely have upped their game in terms of targeting customers at the right time, with the right thing. I guess in addition to that, a lot of other food service companies have also been recently targeting customers pretty effectively, like the likes of Deliveroo, Food Panda, etc. So I think basically all of these companies have one thing in common, which is a high transaction volume. So I guess those are the companies that are in the best position to target their customers the most effectively. And a bit offbeat, I think Spotify is one of the companies that's doing this pretty well as well. I mean, sending new releases, artist recommendations, stuff like that. I think they've really nailed down their algorithms, and they're using an effective CRM strategy to drive more time on the platform. So I think there are some questions on chat as well. The one English question I see is that from case study with option 2 on the last slide, what if the retention cost from customer A is higher than customer B? I think that's a very good question. And that's one of the reasons why I said, right, that you need to make your decision based on the facts that have been presented. So in the scenario that I presented, there is no mention of retention cost. We're assuming that it's the same. The only thing we're looking at is lifetime value. But in the case where you're spending more to retain that customer, then definitely you need to add that kind of a view in as well. Just your lifetime value to acquisition is not sufficient. But in a way,
sorry.
Yeah. But in a way, you could use that retention as part of your lifetime value. I've just taken it as your average transaction and your average frequency, but there is another way to look at it. You just bake in the retention costs as well.
Can I ask Tanay really quickly?
So sorry, can I just make a quick joke on that? I would say great question, Reski. Do you want to disclose where you work in the past, maybe? Yeah, okay, so I'll share. So Reski had some experience with Uber Indonesia. So
Oh, okay.
not in the CRM, if I'm not mistaken, but like,
Yeah, I think that was a very good question.
Razi.
I forgot what I was going to ask. Your joke was so funny. Now I was actually wondering, like in Grab, when you factor in retention cost, does it include all of the like vouchers, discount vouchers for Grab food, for instance, and things like that?
Yeah, so that kind of gets baked into your lifetime costs, because if your basically your commission goes down, right? If you aren't charging that whole 20%, you're giving promos, etc., then your lifetime value goes down. So I wouldn't take it as part of retention. I would just take it as part of overall lifetime contribution.
Cool.
Question, Tanay.
Yeah.
What kind of system that you are using in for this CRM? Are you using Salesforce? And because you're mentioning a couple of times Salesforce, and the other one, which is the what I cannot remember. Yeah. What kind of system is one? Second is what kind of setup of your team looking at this, all the whole CRM? Yeah, you can say CRM team.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good question as well. So in terms of tools, we have a few tools that we use. We use a combination of in-house tools as well as tools that we have onboarded. So Salesforce is one of them. We've used tools like Oracle-based tools in the past as well. But yeah, it's basically a combination of tools that we've developed as well as tools like Salesforce. In terms of the setup of the team, so I am basically the sort of the business owner slash the strategy driver. So I am titled as kind of like the life cycle manager, and then the rest of the team, which entails people who work on the data analytics part and people who work on the operational execution of the platform part. They kind of support the strategies that I come up with. So you can think of me as kind of like the visionary. I'm just trying to brag a little bit, and then yeah, on both sides I have data support and operational support to kind of execute on those strategies.
Okay, thank you, Tanay.
Talking of bragging, do you how to say, do you agree that basically Uber, when Uber came to Southeast Asia, especially from a CRM perspective, they brought a lot of kind of innovation and they really upped the game in the region? Because this is a story that goes into the into the old digital marketeers like me, and I would like to hear your thought on that.
No, I think Uber definitely really upped the game. They had perfected a lot of their strategies in the States and across the globe, and they were able to put all of their best learnings into the region. And I think what was really cool about Uber was they were doing so much of complicated stuff, yet they were able to keep it so simple, right? Like that was their play. Um, if you look at any of their communications, it has a very clear message, a very clear call to action, etc. But I think what Grab has perfected, which is what has helped Grab survive in the region, is how can you use sort of regional or globalized strategies and localize them, right? So how can you have kind of like the localized model where you are communicating with all of your stakeholders in an extremely localized manner, but you're building strategies regionally. So I think that's what Grab has done really well.
And what is the answer to that? I mean, just in short, what is the the best approach to that regional versus localization when it comes to CRM?
I don't think there is a right answer. Both the companies did best what they were doing. But if I had to pick one in Southeast Asia, the strategy that I think works better is definitely the hyper localized strategy, which is what we're doing at Grab.
I would second that as well, especially in countries like Southeast Asia, right? For example, because countries that are just like side by side, for example, Singapore and Malaysia can have a very different cultural implications, right? And the way that you the way that you project your creative, right, your assets, right, and what is actually on their mind. For example, Singapore is, let's say, more of a first world countries rather than Malaysia, right? So some of the considerations might be different. For example, Singapore might consider more into the security part. Malaysia might consider more into the price or cost part, right? Therefore, you have to really localize your campaign.
Yeah.
There is a great question that actually in English, so you don't need my translation, from Adi. Wondering how CRM being implemented in a SME or a non-tech company, since based on his understanding, CRM is effective for high volume transaction company or with a lot of data. And is CRM still relevant or too overkill to be implemented in a SME non-tech based company?
Yeah, I think that's a good question as well. I don't think necessarily that CRM is not effective for smaller companies, but what I do think is important is to sort of supplement your CRM strategy in smaller companies where you may not have enough data with other strategies as well. So, for example, you're a small company and you have limited data points for your customers. In those kinds of cases, it may be more effective for you to maybe build various different consumer personas or different consumer archetypes, use those kinds of strategies to supplement your CRM strategy. But what CRM is helping you do is manage your relationship with the customer. You still need to be timely, relevant, and personalized in a small company. So I think the relevance still remains. It's just what you can do with more data and less data is what the difference is in these two companies. So you can still do different things with less data, right? Like you have 5 data points in a small company. Maybe you want to build a profile of your customers so that you can target them. Whereas in a bigger company, you have enough data to be able to target these customers on a more individualized basis. So that's how I would see the difference in a small and a big company. And maybe in a smaller company, your team would be more limited and a single person might be doing a lot more execution, etc. as well. Yeah.
Maybe Pierre, since you started from scratch the marketing and the online marketing team at Stashaway. So how did you approach the prioritization in terms of activities, channels, and skills and skill set within the team when it comes to CRM versus other marketing channels?
Yep. Shameless self plugin. If you want to know the answers, you should look at the lecture recording that I had, because it was clearly there on the last slide.
I know the answer.
But I think first things first, right? If you are in a smaller company, you should start with the quick wins first, right? There's bound to be a lot of low hanging fruit, especially in a company where you haven't started up anything, right? So you focus on this low hanging fruit. Yes, as Adi said, the mindset is what's more important, right? So the mindset is like your life stages of your customers, right? Those are like your low-hanging fruit, right? First, check whether you have an onboarding campaigns or not, for example, right? Those are a great place to start with. It doesn't need to be like 10 different trip campaigns, each one of them personalized to your customers, but like a simple notes, a welcome, USPs, right? Maybe 1 or 2 emails is sufficient to start with, and you'll start seeing great results from there.
Yep.
I guess it's almost 9. So Pierre, did you want to close?
I'm very bad at like introduction and closing.
I just like looking at you score, man. Tanay, thank you for your time tonight. It was such an awesome sharing session. We've recorded it, so those that want to watch it again can do so. I want to ask on behalf of the students if it's okay to have a PDF version of your presentation. If so, please send it to me and I'll share it with everyone that's here.
Yeah.
For myself and the RevoU team and all RevoU alumni, students, and upcoming students, we thank you for tonight, and hopefully we get to kind of meet you again sometime soon for another sharing session.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds good. Thank you for having me. Thanks for taking time out on a Friday evening. I know in these times, you know, we don't have anywhere to go, so you're still at home, but still. and yeah,
no, all you gotta do is just change the background to a disco and you're good.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, look forward to hopefully interacting with you guys again in the future.
Excellent. Everybody have a great night. For those of you, for batch 2, see you tomorrow with Pierre. And for everyone else, see you next week. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Thank you,
bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good night.
Thank you.